So many children were killed. They're so little and they're so tiny and they're so innocent.
Call is indicating she thinks there's someone shooting in the building. The shooting appears to have stopped. The school is in lockdown.
I heard like 7 loud booms.
I saw smoke and I smelled smoke. Then bullets whizzed by.
The teacher told us to all go where our library is and get behind something so the guy wouldn't see us.
As soon as I heard the name, I was just completely shocked, like, that I knew this person.
Evil visited this community today.
There was sobbing, there was yelling, there was people throwing themselves on the floor, and that was awful. Excuse me.
Letting them talk about their fears is calming, but young children do not need to hear the nitty-gritty.
They had their entire lives ahead of them. Our hearts are broken today.
Good evening and welcome to a special hour of coverage. Lester Holt is in our New York studios and our team is here in what must be tonight the saddest place on earth, Newtown, Connecticut. It was here in the even smaller hamlet called Sandy Hook at the local elementary school for grades K through 4 that a young man wearing black and heavily armed entered the school and started firing today. He killed 20 small children and 6 adults before taking his own life. And this is one of 2 crime scenes in this same town tonight. This small New England town at the northern edge of the New York suburbs in the middle of the Connecticut countryside and all decorated for Christmas has just been destroyed. Everybody in this country, from the President of the United States on down, has the same question tonight. How could someone have done this, and how could someone have killed these kids? Tonight, Lester Holt starts off the broadcast with a look at what has become one of the darkest days in modern American history.
The families who live in small Newtown, Connecticut, 80 miles northeast of New York City, called it the safest place in America, green and peaceful and great for kids. And then, today.
Just after 9:30 this morning, Newtown police received a 911 call for an emergency at the elementary school.
Police transmissions crackled with urgency.
Call is indicating she thinks there's someone shooting in the building.
Soon, police, both on duty and off, were converging on the school, rushing toward what was once the safest of havens, but now a crime scene.
I will need 2 ambulances at this time.
Within minutes, a reverse 911 call went out to parents.
Due to reports of a shooting, as yet unconfirmed, the district is taking preventative measures by putting all schools in lockdown until we ensure safety of all students and staff. Thank you.
The awful details of what happened inside Sandy Hook Elementary School are still emerging tonight. Connecticut State Police spokesman Lieutenant Paul Vance said the gunman opened fire in a single area of the school.
The shootings did take place in one section of the school in 2 rooms.
But tonight, it is the children themselves who are giving us first-hand accounts of what went on inside the school.
The teacher told us to all go where our library is and get behind something so nobody, since there's a window in the door, nobody would see, the guy wouldn't see us.
Children who were just learning their numbers were suddenly counting off gunshots.
How many gunshots would you say you heard as you were in this hallway walking with an assistant?
Well, I think it was something like 10.
In the midst of the horror, the kid said teachers stayed calm.
I was in the gym and I heard I heard like 7 loud booms, and the gym teachers told us to go in the corner. So we all huddled, and I kept hearing these booming noises.
This young man said his 9-year-old sister was in art class.
They were hiding in the closet, in a tiny closet, all bundled up, and they were hearing screams, and it was horrible.
At some point, the shooting stopped. The children and teachers hiding in closets, under desks, and behind bookcases heard the sound of police calling out, "You're safe."
Our main objective was to evacuate as quickly and efficiently as possible any and all students and faculty in the school.
But they made sure about one thing. Police told the children to close their eyes as they passed by the school's main office. They walked in single file, a chain of children, here to the nearby Sandy Hook Fire Department, which had become a maze of police cars, fire trucks, and ambulances. Helicopters hovered overhead. Parents, hearing the news, came racing up the hill in their cars, desperate for information.
There's no words that I could come up with that would even come close to describing the sheer terror of hearing that your son is in a place where there's been violence and you can't do anything to immediately help them or protect them.
Others stood around waiting, helpless, stunned.
There's really no words to express the magnitude of this. You know, you send your child to school, you think they're going to be safe, they're happy, and all of a sudden you get a phone call or you get a text that there's been a shooting at your child's school.
2 children were seen being carried from the school.
They looked very pale, very injured, it was bad.
I know some of them I'm not going to see anymore.
Parents lucky enough to find their children safe held them tight, and the questions began.
I don't know how he came in, because every time you go in, you have to ring a bell.
People began lining up outside a nearby church to pray. The sheer numbers overwhelmed not just the community, but all of Connecticut. Officials had to pull in medical examiners from out of state. Attention soon focused on the shooter.
Breaking news right now. State police are responding to a report of a school shooting in Newtown, Connecticut.
He's been identified as 20-year-old Adam Lanza. Police and federal officials say he was dressed in black and armed with at least 2 guns when he entered the school. His target was apparently the kindergarten classroom where his mother taught. He walked in and opened fire. Then police say he killed himself. And just when they thought they had recovered all the victims, police found one more. This time, not at the school. A body believed to be Lanza's mother was discovered inside her Newtown home, where the shooter also lived.
One more, as we just added, a secondary crime scene. There's a deceased adult at the secondary crime scene.
Police later searched his car, house, and his brother's home in New Jersey. So far, no one has been able to answer the key question: why did he do it?
Our citizens, beautiful children, had their life taken away from them.
In the meantime, Governor Dan Malloy tried to find a way to comfort not just the community, but his shell-shocked state.
What has happened and what has transpired at that school building will leave a mark on this community and every family impacted. I only ask that all of our fellow citizens here in the United States and around the world who have already offered their assistance remember all of the victims in their prayers.
A sentiment echoed by the president himself. He ordered all government flags to fly at half-staff in memorial to the dead. Later, he addressed the country.
I know there's not a parent in America who doesn't feel the same overwhelming grief that I do. The majority of those who died today were children. Beautiful little kids between the ages of 5 and 10 years old.
Tonight, an all-too-common scene in this country, a candlelight vigil, as another community tries to absorb the violence that visited it and mourn the innocents lost.
That community, Newtown, and today was the second deadliest school shooting in American history after the 2007 massacre at Virginia Tech, which, Brian, took 32 lives.
Well, Lester continues to be an unbelievable scene here. A short time ago on this very spot, in fact, I was joined here by 2 police lieutenants who have been on the scene here all day. From the Connecticut State Police, the man we've been watching on television all day, Lieutenant Paul Vance, and from the local police department here in Newtown, Lieutenant George Cinco. First of all, from the state police perspective, how much can we all know? How much are we allowed to know tonight about what you've seen on this scene?
Well, this is truly a horrific situation that we encountered here in Newtown. It started at 9:30 this morning when that emergency call came into Newtown Police, and Newtown officers responded, immediately called for help. and the rescue process began. And many children and staff members were rescued, but as you well know, 20 children didn't make it and 6 adults didn't make it out of that school.
Lieutenant Cinco, this is your jurisdiction, your town. When a call comes in, shots fired, Sandy Hook Elementary, it must not have sounded real.
Exactly. That's exactly what I thought, that it was going to turn out to be, a miscommunication. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case.
These are friends and these are neighbors.
Yes. Yes, it's a small community here. Things like this just don't happen in this town, and good people. It's just not something we thought we'd ever see.
Lieutenant, how about all the first responders you've seen?
Well, we've done everything we can, and it's important to note that between the fire, EMS, and police personnel that responded, they needed counseling too. It's difficult to see human beings that have been murdered, have been killed. It's even more difficult when it involves children. And this scene was horrific. It was heart-wrenching, and it's something that many of us will never get over.
Was this individual known to you at all, or was he just one of the anonymous citizens who lived among us as recently as this morning?
Yeah, we're not going to really comment on any of the specifics with him. Obviously he's a resident of town, but we're certainly going to look at every avenue of this case to try to come to as best a resolution as we can.
Lieutenant Cinco, there's not enough words to tell this town how sorry we are, but what can you say to a national audience on behalf of your town?
Just that these are good people here. Things like this shouldn't happen to people like that, and there are no words that can ever really satisfy someone in this situation. There just isn't. And all we can do is the best we can to try to leave no stone unturned and try to answer all the questions about why this happened.
2 veteran police officers. It's become a cliche. No one expects this in the town where they live, especially not Newtown, Connecticut. We can't repeat this often enough. This is middle-class, countryside New England. Some of these houses in this town date back to the mid-1700s. And as both police officers couldn't repeat often enough, this story has become about these families. Here we are, days away from Christmas, and they have lost their pride and joy. We have a look at some of the loss in this town tonight from NBC's Ann Kerr.
As hard as it is to comprehend this tragedy, for the teachers who were part of these children's lives and charged with keeping them safe, what happened today is unbearable.
It's a close community. Everyone kind of works together, so it's hard.
Erin D'Elia is a behavioral therapist at Sandy Hook Elementary. She works one-on-one with autistic kindergarten and preschool students. She doesn't work on Fridays, so as fate would have it, she was out of the line of fire. Her father texted her about the attack.
It makes me feel like happy that I wasn't there, but guilty that I wasn't there as well to help.
We were with Erin and several of her friends earlier today when, with lumps in their throats, they huddled together, waiting for word about what was happening with their colleagues and their students.
Just to not be there and to not have any information, it's hard to hear everything through the news.
Details trickled in, and they were dreadful.
I don't even know how to wrap my head around the fact that so many children were killed, knowing the ages of this school. They're so little and they're so tiny and they're so innocent. I can't even. There aren't words to express.
And then something nobody expected, a call with the worst possible news. One of her students was gone.
No.
Just a short distance away, Monsignor Robert Weiss of the St. Rose Catholic Church in Newtown had been called to counsel families gathered at the firehouse. He had baptized many of the children at Sandy Hook Elementary and now tried to give solace to their parents.
The intensity of emotion is really hard to put into words. It was sobbing, there was yelling, there was people throwing themselves on the floor. It was a whole range of emotions, and there were people, hugging each other, settling down, and then it would come back to them again, and you'd hear an outburst periodically, but it was very, very heavy emotion.
The parents ached for children, and children ached for children.
Some of them wanted to go home, but they were conflicted because they didn't want to leave their friends. you know, and they were really conflicted this morning about whether to leave or not. You know, they wanted to just be together. It's surreal.
And in those surreal moments, reality descended with intense cruelty.
One of the ladies, her phone just went off because it was time to take her little boy to a Cub Scout meeting. And she realized, you know, I can't take him now.
Good afternoon, everyone.
At 3 p.m., when Connecticut's governor announced the full scale of the tragedy, defenses kicked in and raw emotion mixed with denial.
If it's just a matter of hugging them and crying with them and praying with them, you know, they're in many, many places right now themselves emotionally. I think there's still some that are not quite sure this is real.
Though the pastor had helped others cope with death on a regular basis, he had never had to deal with anything like this.
Oh, it was awful. Excuse me. I mean, these are 20 people the week before Christmas that just lost their joy. You know, how do you live with that?
Monsignor Weiss doesn't doubt the community will get support, but he wonders how to even begin to help children understand.
I don't know how you recover. How do you recover from something as horrible as this? You know, how do you help a child have to walk into the front door of that school, you know, the next day that they have class and not see their principal or any of their other staff that really cared about them or their friends?
One source of resilience potentially for this community is its very small size and also its closeness. Everyone seems to know everyone here, Brian, and tonight it felt like no one was really alone. In churches, around kitchen tables, in living rooms all across this little community, people came together to begin to help each other bear this unbearable loss.
This is very hard to discuss. The police told me tonight that the bodies of the children have started to come out of the school. Their parents were able to be with them all day and into tonight to make positive identifications. A word to our viewers, we have tried to show the same sensitivity, and I think this is true to these families as we would want in our own lives. It's just this town has been torn apart, and the degrees of separation, Ann, are down to 1 and 2 families. Everyone knows someone.
Exactly right. And we, in fact, met several families, and exactly to your point earlier, you know, so many of them were so traumatized, there was no possibility that we could actually put them on camera. And what happened in this firehouse, according to people we've spoken to, is that the families, after they gathered, and you heard the Monsignor talk about how many of them found out that their children were not coming home. Well, those families were taken, family by family, to that school to identify their children. And can you imagine the difficulty in that building right behind us and the heartbreak? And so perhaps it is just right that the world is paying attention to these people and their loss.
We've been saying all day, this is a local volunteer firehouse, the way most of our fires get fought in this country, larger than most because we're right alongside an interstate here. These are citizen volunteers who were going on about their lives today when they were called to be first responders, and tonight the FBI is in there. People have been bringing food by and comforting everybody. It's a rough time in this small town. Ann Curry here with us in Newtown, Connecticut. Lester, back to you in the studio in New York.
And you know, Brian, as we all try to understand why anyone would want to hurt innocent children, for much of the day, law enforcement was struggling to answer even the most basic question of just who was the alleged gunman. Tonight, with the help of some of those who knew him, the picture is starting to take shape. Here's Chris Hansen.
As darkness descended on this idyllic Connecticut neighborhood filled with beautiful homes and glowing holiday decorations, so did the veil of horror and confusion. When Jim McDade first heard the sirens this morning, he had no idea the alleged shooter had been living right down the block.
When I first heard the news, I said, no, it's not happening. It's not real. And then when the news broke, I said I was numb.
But in the early chaos of the tragedy, finding answers became a tangled web. First, there was a bare physical description. The shooter wore black, and authorities did say the suspect was dead.
The shooter is deceased in the school.
They said they had a name.
The gunman's name, Ryan Lanza.
Believed to be Ryan Lanza.
Of Ryan Lanza. But local police were not officially identifying the shooter.
We have not made any positive identifications. We're working on that. There's some preliminary identifications have been made, but we have, as I said, a great deal of work.
But other law enforcement sources identified the shooter as Ryan's 20-year-old brother, Adam Lanza.
As we know, all of this began this morning when a man who police say is 20-year-old Adam Lanza.
Tonight, law enforcement sources confirm that 20-year-old Adam Lanza lived in a home here in Newtown, Connecticut with his mother, Nancy. Nancy was a teacher at the school where the shooting took place. They say that Adam was known to be very reclusive. He had no job, but he was considering going back to school. Authorities also confirm that Nancy was found dead today in the home she shared with her son. The cause? A single gunshot wound to the face. We went looking for anyone who knew the family. Marcia Moskowitz did. She used to drive the Lanza brothers to school on her bus. The young man who's the alleged shooter and his brother, how would you describe them?
Well, I had them on the bus many years ago. They were quiet and reserved and shy. That's how I would describe them, but well-behaved kids.
Did they stick out in any way?
No. Average kid.
Maura McDade used to ride the same bus with the Lanza brothers to school. What went through your mind when you heard about this today?
As soon as I heard the name, I was just completely shocked, like, that I knew this person who lived so close to me, that I grew up with them. It's just weird.
Police ended up taking Ryan Lanza in for questioning, but the authorities made it clear that they thought the gunman acted alone.
Right now there is one shooter, but again, we're still looking at every ancillary fact and circumstance related to the deceased shooter at the scene.
Investigators say Adam Lanza was carrying his brother's ID when he shot up the school, adding to the confusion. Law enforcement authorities are reporting that the guns used in the crime were registered to Nancy Lanza, Adam's mother, and were all legally purchased. But why he turned those guns on children is still a mystery tonight.
And Chris Hansen joins us now from Newtown. Chris, has the Lanza family been able to shed any light on a possible motive?
You know, Lester, this one still has law enforcement authorities shaking their heads. It's early in the investigation, but as far as they can tell, there are no obvious indicators as to why he would do this. There are no rantings online. There wasn't even very much a social footprint. Lanza's brother and father submitted to voluntary interviews in New Jersey today with law enforcement investigators. They really couldn't provide much. In fact, Lanza's brother said he hadn't even talked to Adam in many, many months.
And I know right now authorities are involved in that very sensitive and difficult process of identification of the victims. But that said, do we have any idea when they might release the names of the families affected?
It could be a while, Lester. The Connecticut State Police have one of the finest forensic evidence gathering teams in this nation, if not the world. They will be going through that school very meticulously, trying to get every potential piece of evidence they can. It will likely be a few days before they actually wrap that up and they're in a position to actually release the identities of the bodies.
And what do the sources tell you is next in this investigation?
Well, it's all going to be about evidence. You know, obviously the suspected shooter is dead. He killed himself today. They have recovered the weapons, the assault-type rifle, the 2 handguns he had with him. They found other weapons in his car and at home. They'll be, you know, looking at that. And really, it's right now all about the school. What's there, what happened, and in what order.
Chris Hansen, thank you. Let's go back now to Brian in Connecticut. Brian?
Well, Lester, as you know, I tend to be partial to first responders anyway, but it tells you something about the scope of this tragedy that even the first responders to the scene today, and those include police officers, state police, but also the local volunteers, even those first responders were all assigned grief counselors because of what they had to see and deal with. The nearest big hospital is in Danbury, Connecticut. Their emergency room was put on full alert just after the shooting. Personnel came in. They were warned to prepare for the very worst. Sadly, though, that's not what happened. We pick up that part of the story with NBC's Andrea Canning.
After the shooting, the schools in Newtown were in lockdown, and so was Danbury Hospital as its emergency room staff braced to receive the wounded. Dr. John Murphy is head of the hospital.
The ED is currently under lockdown, and the reason for that is really out of an abundance of caution. We want to be sure that we allow the ED team to focus on the work at hand.
I assembled 4 teams, 1 in each trauma room.
Dr. Pat Broderick is in charge of the emergency room.
So you obviously have plans in place for this type of emergency.
We rehearse this, we practice this. We hope to God we will never need this, but in the event that an event does occur, everybody just goes back into their basic training and just does whatever they need to do to be helpful.
Just after 10 o'clock in the morning, the victims started coming, one after the other, each 5 minutes apart. 2 children and 1 adult, all 3 suffering from serious gunshot wounds.
In many situations when you have gunshots of this magnitude, the amount and significance of the injuries is just tremendous. And I'll just say that today's events were just a tragedy that you could not even ever in your wildest dreams imagine for your community.
Because this is a trauma hospital, doctors and nurses are prepared for the worst. And today they got the call to expect a lot of victims. But after the first 3 arrived, no more victims came through their doors.
You're ready for possibly a lot of people to come in here, a lot of children. And then when you don't see the people coming, what's going through your mind at that point?
It was traumatic in and of itself, in that we all knew what that meant. This must have been what they felt on 9/11, when there was an expectation that there would be many, many injured, and when they didn't come, it in a sense just compounded the tragedy of what we were facing.
Trauma teams are trained to be methodical in the face of tragedy. But for the staff at Danbury, this tragedy was especially hard. The 2 children they were treating didn't make it. And it was also deeply personal. Many doctors and nurses live in Newtown or know someone who does.
It's enormously sad. I mean, we're all grieving. I don't think there is a person here that doesn't know somebody who was affected. And I think, though, that there are going to be moments of great sorrow, given that they were exposed to some things that I don't think any professional ever contemplates they're going to have to deal with.
Andrea, I have to say, parts of this reminded me of the 9/11 in New York City. The hospitals were alerted to expect so many injured and wounded. It didn't happen because of the heavy loss of life. And you've got all these hospital staff members clinging on to any bit of good news they can get.
And that's exactly what the head of the hospital mentioned was 9/11. Exactly what you just said.
And so tonight, the town kind of takes its collective breath. Everyone gathering at these houses of worship. The hospitals are back down to normal. They wanted to do more, and they just couldn't.
Yeah, and you know, it was with such a heavy heart that we had to report that those 2 children didn't make it. You know, we were really hoping that they were going to pull through. We did get some good news just before the broadcast. The adults, we don't know male or female, did pull through and is expected to make it. So one family will get their loved one home.
Andrea Canning, after a day of reporting here in Newtown, thanks. When we come back, how the entire nation reacted to the news of this day and what kind of conversation this might start.
I know there's not a parent in America who doesn't feel the same overwhelming grief that I do. The majority of those who died today were children. Beautiful little kids between the ages of 5 and 10 years old. They had their entire lives ahead of them. Birthdays, graduations, weddings, kids of their own.
All day, reporters covering the tragedy, many of them parents themselves, wrestled to hold their emotions at bay.
There are reports that the children were told to cover their eyes as they fled past the school's main office.
And it's inside that room of kindergartners where most of the casualties took place.
Kindergartners. I don't know. I don't think we have any words for it.
Just yesterday, children in this close-knit community were eagerly anticipating Christmas. But now, instead of dreaming about gifts under the tree, they will be haunted by nightmarish images from a morning of terror. Connecticut's Governor Daniel Malloy struggled to come to grips with the indescribable tragedy.
Evil visited this community today. Children, beautiful, beautiful children, who had simply come to school to learn, and their day ended a very different way than any of us could possibly have imagined. And quite frankly, as we stand here today, still can't imagine.
In Newtown and across the nation, flags were lowered in sorrow. The entire country plunged into an angry sadness.
Oh my God, not again. I don't understand why people can have just awful killing machines for no reason. For what? For what reason? It's just horrible.
My heart's bleeding for the families, and I just don't know what to say.
And tonight, candlelight vigils from the White House.
Our first act will be an act of prayer.
To churches right in Newtown honored the victims.
Well, thank you for gathering on this most horrible day in our history.
In the frenzy of the holidays, we are suddenly a nation brought to a horrified halt. As he offered prayers to the victims' loved ones, House Speaker John Boehner announced there will be no weekly Republican address tomorrow. Even Twitter, usually abuzz with millions of topics, boiled down to a single focus, all with the same hashtag: Pray for Newtown.
How many times have we heard it? A man dressed in black with a gun opens fire at a school, at an office, in a theater, at a mall. Today's shooting in Connecticut was one of the worst in our history, and each time we're forced to revisit that list, which just seems to continue to grow and grow. Before one community has even begun to heal, it seems to happen to another, and the same questions are asked all over again. Here's Harry Smith.
This week, just 3 days ago, a gunman went to the mall in Clackamas, Oregon. He killed 2 strangers, then killed himself. His victims were a much-loved hospice nurse and a youth sports coach who one friend described as bigger than life. We were disturbed by the shooting because it took place at a busy mall filled with holiday shoppers. But these events don't stay with us for long. The dead are buried and the news cycle moves on. Perhaps we have become inured to the horror. April 1999. 12 students and 1 teacher were shot and killed at Columbine High School in Colorado. 21 more survived with gunshot wounds. Among them, Craig Scott.
The day of the shooting at Columbine, it was the worst day of my life. This is worse than Columbine. These are little kids that we're talking about. And so many parents' hearts are breaking out there. And I'm sure the little kids don't quite understand what's happening.
In America, the word Columbine has become synonymous with mass shooting. The pictures of students fleeing the school are images we personalized. What would we do if something like this happened in our school? What if somebody with a gun went after our kids?
It is hard to imagine it if you haven't been through it, but it is. You go into shock. It's almost surreal, like it's not happening. At first, it doesn't seem real, and it takes some time for that shock to wear off. And the people that were at the school that day, they're in shock right now, and they will be for a while.
Columbine was an event so terrible that schools around the country developed protocols so teachers would know how to protect their students in similar situations. Protocols teachers use today to save lives in Connecticut.
We all started, we didn't scream, we started crying. So all the gym teachers told us to go into the office where no one could find us.
That we even have procedures in place to protect our kids from events like this is worth contemplating. Does it mean we've decided this kind of violence is something we just have to live with? April 2007. 32 people are killed and 17 are injured during a mass shooting at Virginia Tech. Colin Goddard was one of those hit by gunfire.
I think I was like most Americans, who think as long as we live in nice places and, send our kids to good schools, this is not going to happen to us. And I learned that even there, that you can become a victim of gun violence.
This was the massacre that stopped us cold. All that promise snuffed out in an instant. All that unspeakable suffering. All that fear again.
There's not one thing you know, that's going to stop all shootings in this country, you know. But we can do better than 100,000 Americans hit by a bullet every year.
January 2011, 6 people were killed and 13 were injured in a strip mall parking lot where Congresswoman Gabby Giffords was holding a constituent meet and greet. Shock, horror, another vigil, more mourning. These things happen with a sickening frequency. The shooting at the Sikh temple in Wisconsin this summer, the blood spilled in a movie theater in Aurora, Colorado. Guns are used to kill more than 30,000 people a year in America. Yet gun violence is a topic rarely discussed by our politicians. The silence is deafening. Dan Gross is the president of the Brady campaign to prevent gun violence.
Some people have said, the White House even said, today's not the day to have a conversation about gun violence or gun control. Would you agree or disagree with that?
Every day is the day to have a conversation about what we can do to prevent tragedies like the one that happened today. You know, yes, there was a tragedy today that's captured very appropriately, you know, the hearts and minds of the public, but every day in our nation, 32 people are murdered with guns. And the majority of those instances are inherently preventable. And every day that we don't discuss it, more people are dying unnecessarily.
We contacted the NRA about today's shooting, and they responded in an email. Until the facts are thoroughly known, the NRA will not have any comment. Fighting tears, perhaps President Obama did start the conversation this afternoon.
As a country, we have been through this too many times. Whether it's an elementary school in Newton or a shopping mall in Oregon or a temple in Wisconsin or a movie theater in Aurora or a street corner in Chicago, these neighborhoods are our neighborhoods and these children are our children. And we're going to have to come together and take meaningful action to prevent more tragedies like this, regardless of the politics.
Harry Smith is with us now. When I ran into you a little while ago, the first thing we said to each other is like, man, we've seen this. We've seen this before. We trot out that list every time, and we go through Jonesboro and all these other places. The list keeps growing longer, as I noted. But even tonight, any number of trauma centers around this country, we could stand there and watch gunshot victims come in.
You have spent all that time in Chicago. You know what it was like there this past summer. There was a weekend when 30 people were shot, 10 people were killed. Not just one weekend, but several weekends. Every day, every night in this country, people are falling down dead because they've been shot. And what is amazing to me, as we have covered these stories over all these years, is how little actual conversation there is in this country about, is this just okay? Is this just all right? That 100,000 people a year have bullets go through their body, 30,000 die, but that's another 70,000 that are walking wounded.
Well, it's a two-part conversation, because the first part of the conversation, we're all united today in this sense of grief and sadness and horror. But when you move to the second natural part of the conversation, that unity breaks apart, as you know.
Well, it's interesting because no one's really, offered any meaningful kinds of legislation or anything. People like the Brady Group have basically given up on even trying. I think is very interesting is there is this equation that's available. There are more guns per capita in the United States than any other country on the face of the earth except Yemen. More than 300 million guns are in people's hands in the United States. The Second Amendment, it may in fact be sacred to many, many, many people. But is there any kind of common ground to say that this can't go on the way it's going on?
Harry Smith, thank you. Let's go back now to Brian in Newtown.
Well, Lester, here's another way to think of this community. Until this happened this morning, Newtown, Connecticut had what so many Americans yearn for. It was a peaceful place. It had a terrific quality of life. All of that shattered with this one act by one young man. That part of this story tonight from NBC's Kate Snow.
Sandy Hook is the kind of New England village that people drive hundreds of miles to see in the fall. Majestic maples turn the town red, and weekenders out looking for quaintness find it on Main Street. But December is the real magic time here. Lampposts are draped with evergreens, and local firemen usually do a brisk business selling Christmas trees.
It's a phenomenal town to bring your children up in.
If Norman Rockwell were still alive and painting, he'd paint Sandy Hook.
There's never any crime here. Everybody's happy. It's a family-oriented community.
This morning, Christmas was so close you could smell it. Then, in an instant, Christmas never seemed further away.
This is most definitely the worst thing that we've had experience here in town.
Maybe it was the setting and the season that gave today's slaughter of innocents such an awful resonance.
As heartbreaking as it is just for something to happen, but so close to the holidays where everybody's supposed to be happy, it breaks your heart to the poor families. And as a parent, you know, thinking how you would feel, you know, you can't even imagine.
Marcy Benitez runs a clothing store and haircut salon for kids on Main Street. On any other day, her shop would be filled with children's voices and Christmas wishes. This afternoon, only the sound of television news filled the emptiness. The clothes on her racks, mute reminders of those who will never wear them. Like everyone in town, Marcy's heartsick, desperately trying to understand what's happened.
Everybody is like family. You know, it's such a close-knit community, and everybody knows each other and helps each other. You know, it's a heartbreaking situation.
Michael Porco moved here more than 30 years ago so his son Michael Jr. could attend Sandy Hook schools. Both father and son know of families that were affected by today's tragedy.
We've reached out to a few. We don't have definite answers as far as status on everyone, but we're still hopeful and we're still looking out to find out some of the information about them.
I would have never thought something of this horrific tragedy would have come to Sandy Hook. I mean, this is such a sweet town.
At the local Methodist church on the main street of town, they opened the sanctuary this afternoon for people to come and pray. The Red Cross is setting up shop in the basement.
We just want to be here for people that need to be with God and to try to make some sense out of this. And it doesn't make any sense. Not in a place like this.
All over town, signs ask for prayers. State police shepherd shell-shocked families to their cars. And local firemen, many who rushed to the scene this morning, stoically tried to comfort families and friends of the dead children. What this community has been through today is unthinkable.
Everyone's coming together, supporting everyone, working together, trying to answer all the questions as to how and why this occurred, and trying to lend support to all the people involved.
Kate Snow is with us from just across town. Kate, I saw some of the pictures of the people streaming in there tonight, and it's so understandable. All people wanted was kind of the comfort of community and having a companion to talk to.
That's right, and remember, Brian, this is a place where everyone knows everyone, so almost everyone knows a family that's been affected. I watched hundreds of people stream into the church behind me, the Catholic church here in town. About 900 were inside, hundreds more were outside, peering in through the windows in the dark and the cold, singing Silent Night at one point. And Brian, one thing that really struck me, a lot of children here tonight, children who attended that elementary school, talking about what happened today. One little boy asked his mom, "Did the principal die?" And she said, "I don't know." Brian?
Part of what makes it so sad, Kate, you pointed this out earlier today, the beautiful decorations throughout this town, the creche behind you in front of the church, just the immovable truth of this story that we're so close to the Christmas holiday. Kate Snow, who's been covering this story for us all day. A couple of points from here. Number one, you hear the constant din behind us. We apologize. It's hard to hear because of the sound of generators on the fire equipment. Number two, parents are still coming from the school this late in the evening over to the school, over to the firehouse. We're not going to put them on television because they deserve their privacy, but this process is still going on, and they're still seeking comfort and talking to investigators. But finally, I want to show you a live picture alongside the firehouse right behind us. Prior to what happened this morning, the most important thing going on at the firehouse was the annual sale of Christmas trees and wreaths. And they're just sitting there alongside this firehouse, which is now part of the beating heart of this town, what's left of the spirit of this town, where food is coming in, where the FBI have gathered, and where the investigation now goes on. We'll take a break here. When we come back, answering the questions so many parents have across this country, how do we talk to the kids about what has happened here in Newtown? Back here in Newtown, Connecticut tonight, this is such a perverse story, of course, because it involves kids, little kids who did nothing wrong, all these lost souls. It's hard enough all day for adults to process what happened here. What do you say to the children? Of course, no two cases, no two kids are alike, but the experts do have some advice. That part of the story tonight from NBC is Natalie Morales.
I can't explain how I'm feeling right now. My heart is breaking.
As our nation tries to wrap its head around the unfathomable violence.
I was in the gym and I heard I heard like 7 loud booms, and the gym teachers told us to go in the corner.
Tonight, parents will hug their children a little tighter and struggle to comfort them. But how do they explain what they themselves can't understand?
Could anything be worse? All of a sudden, this mass shooting happens in the school. As parents, we need to protect our kids, and here on a massive scale, kids were not protected.
Dr. Glenn Sachs, director of the NYU Department of Child Psychiatry, says parents need to prepare themselves before talking to their kids.
Make sure you're calm enough. You need to make sure that you are not feeling too much grief, too much anxiety, too much anger. Make sure you're steady and have the conversation, and it'll go okay.
And when you're ready to approach your kids, there are certain things you should remember.
You want to be open so that your child feels that they can talk to you about whatever is bothering them about it, but you want to be calming.
Psychiatrist Dr. Gail Saltz, who has studied the effects of violence on children, says whenever this kind of thing happens, parents might need to do more than just get their kids to talk.
So letting them talk about their fears, A, is calming, but B, you want to give them coping skills. So it's ways to relax if they're starting to feel anxious. That might be, anything from taking deep breaths, going for a run, something distracting, playing, catch, watching something funny, engaging in something that's just has nothing to do with any of this.
If your child does start asking questions, Salt says how much you reveal depends on his or her age.
They're going to be teenagers who obviously are going to ask questions, and I think it's reasonable to answer those questions. But young children do not need to hear the nitty-gritty.
But no matter what their age, she says always tell the truth.
You say be honest and tell them what happened, but do you tell them how many people died, how many were injured? Do you get into the details of death?
I wouldn't offer the details of death, but if your child asks, I wouldn't evade and be dishonest about them. Because they're going to hear and they need to know that they, 1, can talk to you, and 2, that you're going to be a source of information. And if you're evading the details, then that makes it scarier for them. It tells them that you're too frightened.
When kids hear that other kids were victims, does it make them feel even more unsafe?
If you let them know that part of what's scary for them is just that they can imagine themselves in these shoes, because these were kids too, and you understand that and they can talk about that with you, but they're not these kids. This isn't going to happen to them. You shouldn't let them watch a lot of television because it gives kids the illusion that it's happening more frequently, and it sort of re-traumatizes them.
And parents should keep an eye out for warning signs of trauma.
If your child is having difficulty sleeping, if they're having an appetite change, if you see a change in functioning of school, pulling away from friends, not wanting to leave home, having more difficulty concentrating on their work, for example, then you want to, and they're telling you that they're worrying, then you might want to get them some sort of treatment.
And it's okay to let your children know that this has been scary for you too.
And I think it's important to let our kids know that violence is frightening and it's okay to be afraid, but I think you also want to let them know you have it in perspective. So while this is scary, it didn't happen to you, and you're going to be okay.
So come Monday morning, when parents across the country send their kids off to school, feeling that hesitation, that fear, while they watch their child's backpack slowly slip out the door, they need to remember school shootings are extremely rare.
The truth is, this rarely happens. It's sometimes easy to lose that perspective in the midst of tragedy, but it's very important to keep that perspective.
And our friend and chief medical correspondent, Dr. Nancy Snyderman, is here mostly in her role as fellow parent tonight. Nancy, one of the messages there, it was interesting, was kind of age-appropriate honesty.
Yes, if you have a kindergartner who has no idea what happened today, there's no reason to bring it up. You have a high school child who needs to go through it, and even if they ask the hard questions, I think what Gail and Natalie talked about is you don't lie, but you don't offer things. I think what we tend to do is we tend to sort of put our parental duties forward, and we don't listen to what kids really want. So those changes in behavior are really important. But one thing I think we haven't really talked about are the first responders behind us. They're going home tonight grieving and shocked. So they take into their own households tonight a jarring new reality, and kids pick up on that. So it's okay for a parent or a teacher to share their grief with their families, and frankly, sometimes let kids be part of that grief and console them. There's no time for family secrets. It's time for sharing the fact that this is rare, it's traumatic, but families come together in times like this and they talk, and when they talk, they heal.
I also have a feeling that not for lack of sympathy or empathy, a lot of Americans with families are going to try to go about their Saturday tomorrow.
And that's important, because I think getting back to normal, whether it's a new normal, whether it's your regular normal, or whether in a town like this, it's a shocked, altered reality of normal. The human condition requires that we take that next step forward, and I think that's important too.
Yes, thank you, Nancy. And let's go back to Lester in New York.
Yeah, Brian, thanks. I think some of the images that have been seared in my head, and I think a lot of ours today, are those images of parents clutching their children's hands, holding them and leading them away from this scene of unspeakable tragedy. And we all put ourselves in that place. What would it be like to get that call? Before we leave you tonight, we wanted to share one last look at some of the most unforgettable and powerful images from this long and difficult day. A difficult day captured in those photos. Let's go back to Brian now in Newtown for his final thoughts. Brian?
Well, Lester, it sounds trite. I don't know what there is to say. I don't know how you answer for this when you look at the President of the United States and he comes up short, at a loss for words. We later learned he had longer remarks to deliver, but he himself couldn't get through it. The question, as we said at the top of the broadcast, Lester, as you've been asking on the coverage all day, who would kill these kids? Where does this come from? How do we recover? It may be unanswerable, and the answer may be just to try to get through it. And a reminder to stay with your late local news tonight for the very latest on this story. I'll remind all of you, my colleague Lester Holt will be joined tomorrow morning for a special live edition of the Today Show. Matt Lauer and Savannah Guthrie will be along with Lester for that. For our entire team, from my friend Lester in New York, our team here on the ground in Newtown, Connecticut, after an awfully dark day across this country, I'm Brian Williams, NBC News.